Each year, military forces conducting operations in remote jungle territories report encounters with phenomena that defy conventional explanation, incidents so disturbing that they immediately classified under national security protocols and buried in archives that few ever access. It happens frequently enough that specialized psychiatric units within the Department of Defense have developed specific evaluation criteria for personnel who claim to have witnessed what they describe as impossible events. During combat operations with annual budgets exceeding $40 million, dedicated solely to managing these cases and ensuring operational silence. The Vietnam War between 1965 and 1973 saw over 2.7 million American service members deployed to the dense jungles of Southeast Asia, where the combination of psychological warfare, extreme isolation, and the ancient history buried beneath the canopy created conditions that military psychologists still struggle to explain decades later. For a brief period, during the final months of 1971, one Marine Force reconnaissance unit operating deep in the Cambodian border region would encounter something so profoundly terrifying and inexplicable that it would result in the complete erasure of their mission from all official military records, as if the entire operation had never existed at all. But what exactly did Sergeant Marcus Holloway and his team discover in the ruins of that forgotten Khmer temple? And why did the Pentagon immediately dispatch a specialized recovery team that arrived with cremation equipment and instructions to leave nothing behind? The border region between South Vietnam and Cambodia encompasses over 12,000 square kilometers of some of the most impenetrable jungle terrain on Earth, where triple canopy rainforest creates a permanent twilight even at midday, and the humidity remains above 90% year-round. The area had been a contested zone for centuries, fought over by Khmer empires, French colonial forces, and now modern militaries, each leaving behind layers of history that the jungle slowly consumed, but never fully erased. Ancient temple complexes built between the 9th and 13th centuries lay scattered throughout these forests, forgotten monuments to civilizations that had vanished long before any Western military set foot in the region. It is perhaps unsurprising, then, that this region had developed a reputation among both local populations and foreign troops as a place where the natural laws seemed to bend, where compasses spun without reason, and where experienced soldiers reported feeling watched by something that predated any modern conflict. The Khmer people who had inhabited these jungles for over a millennium maintained detailed oral histories of locations they refused to enter, places they marked with carved stones bearing warnings in Old Khmer script. One such location, a temple complex they called Prasat Mohabaya, which translates roughly to the Fortress of Great Terror, appeared in French colonial records as early as 1891 when a survey team attempted to map the region. The French report, filed in Saigon and later recovered from archives in Paris, described a partially collapsed stone structure surrounded by unusual magnetic anomalies that rendered their surveying equipment useless. The team's lead cartographer, a man named Henry Duclos, wrote in his personal journal that the local guides refused to approach within 500 meters of the ruins, claiming that people who entered the temple grounds never returned or returned, changed in ways that made them unrecognizable to their own families. Duclos noted strange atmospheric conditions near the site, describing a persistent low-frequency hum that seemed to emanate from the earth itself and caused severe headaches in his team members. The French eventually abandoned the survey, marking the area on their maps with a simple notation that translates to "avoid by order." Similar encounters were documented throughout the 1960s as American forces expanded their operations into the border regions. A Special Forces, a team operating out of Bu Dap in 1968, reported discovering ancient stone structures during a patrol that caused their RADIO equipment to fail completely, with batteries draining in minutes despite being freshly installed. The team's after-action report classified immediately upon filing, described temperature drops of nearly 15 degrees Fahrenheit within a 200-meter radius of the ruins, an impossibility in the tropical climate. 2 members of that team required psychiatric evaluation after the mission, reporting persistent nightmares of stone corridors that moved and changed configuration despite being carved from solid rock. Another incident in early 1970 involved AMA CVSOG reconnaissance team that went silent for 72 hours near the same general coordinates, only to be found wandering alone. Highway 14 unable to account for the missing time and suffering from what medical officers described as acute dissociative episodes. The pattern was clear to those few analysts who had access to the full classified records. Something in that specific area of jungle affected human perception and military equipment in ways that conventional science couldn't explain, and it had been doing so for far longer than any American presence in Southeast Asia. November 18, 1971, 2,230 hours. Our 6-man reconnaissance team had been moving through the jungle for 3 days, following coordinates that hadn't appeared on any standard operational map but had been hand-delivered to our CO in a sealed envelope marked with a classification level I'd never seen before. I was Sergeant Marcus Holloway, call sign Dutch, team leader for Marine Force Recon Unit Charlie 7, and in my 2 tours, I'd run dozens of deep reconnaissance missions into contested territory without incident. This one felt different from the moment we'd received the briefing, not because of the mission parameters themselves, which were standard locate and observe, but because of who had delivered them. A civilian contractor with Department of Defense credentials who would hunt-identify which agency he represented, and who made it clear that radio silence was absolute unless we encountered what he called structural anomalies of historical significance. My second in command was Corporal Vincent Briggs, a communications specialist from Baltimore who could fix any radio ever made and who had an unsettling habit of humming jazz standards during firefights. Our medic was Private Raymond Keller, barely 22 years old, but steady-handed and calm in ways that made him seem decades older. The temperature had dropped noticeably as we approached the coordinates from the usual 85 degrees to something closer to 70, and the jungle sounds that had surrounded us for days, the constant screaming of insects and birds, had faded to complete silence, the kind of quiet that makes your own heartbeat seem deafening. We emerged from the dense undergrowth into a clearing that shouldn't have existed. A perfect circle roughly 50 meters across, where nothing grew except a thin carpet of moss that seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. At the center stood the ruins, massive stone blocks carved with intricate reliefs depicting figures that looked almost human, but not quite, their proportions wrong in ways that made your eyes hurt to follow the details. The temple's entrance was a dark rectangle, perhaps 3 meters high, perfectly cut into the stone with no visible tool marks, and from that opening came a smell I'd never encountered before. Something like copper mixed with decaying flowers, and underneath it all a sharp, chemical odor similar to ozone after a lightning strike. Briggs set up our radio equipment while Keller checked the perimeter, both moving with the practiced silence of men who'd survived by making no unnecessary sound. I approached the entrance slowly, flashlight raised, and that's when I noticed the first impossible thing. The beam of light bent slightly as it crossed the threshold, curving downward as if the doorway itself was pulling the photons toward some gravitational center. I called Briggs over to confirm what I was seeing, and he went pale, pulled out his compass, and watched the needle spin lazily in complete circles, never settling on any direction. The air temperature dropped another 10 degrees in the span of perhaps 30 seconds cold, enough that our breaths started forming visible clouds, and Keller reported that his watch had stopped at exactly 2,237 hours, the second hand frozen mid-tick despite the mechanical movement still being wound. We should have pulled back then, called it in, waited for orders. But the mission parameters had been explicit. investigate any structures discovered at these coordinates, and document what we found. I led Briggs and Keller into the entrance, while the other 3 team members maintained perimeter security. And the moment we crossed that threshold, everything changed in ways that still make my hands shake when I write about it decades later. The interior was vast, far larger than the external dimensions of the structure could possibly contain. A corridor that stretched into darkness beyond the reach of our flashlights, with walls covered in bas-relief carvings that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. The stone beneath our boots felt wrong, too smooth, almost organic, and it was warm to the touch, despite the freezing air temperature. Briggs tried to raise the rest of the team on radio, but got only static, a rhythmic pattern of pulses that came every 7 seconds with mechanical precision. And when he adjusted the frequency, the static changed pitch, but maintained at exact same interval. Then Keller grabbed my arm and pointed at the wall where one of the carved figures, a humanoid shape with 2 many joints in its limbs, appeared to have turned its head toward us, the stone somehow flowing like liquid to change position. I swept my flashlight across the carving, and it was still again, frozen in its new orientation. And that's when we heard the sound, a low vibration that came up through the floor and into our bones. Subsonic, but powerful enough to make our teeth ache and our vision blur at the edges. The 3 of us backed toward the entrance, weapons raised though we had no idea what we would shoot at. And as we retreated, the carvings on both walls began to change more obviously, figures reaching toward us with elongated fingers, mouths opening to reveal throats that went impossibly deep into the solid stone. We burst out into the clearing at a full run, just as the rest of the team started shouting. And when I turned back, the entrance was sealed a solid wall of stone, with no opening visible, as if the doorway had never existed. And carved into that smooth surface was a new relief, showing 6 human figures standing exactly where we stood. Perfect representations down to the equipment we carried and the expressions of terror on our faces frozen in ancient stone. I immediately ordered a tactical retreat to our previous position 200 meters back in the jungle, following every protocol I'd learned for breaking contact with an unknown threat. But even as we moved, I knew that standard operating procedures meant nothing in a situation that defied every rational explanation. Briggs attempted to establish communication with our forward operating base, using every frequency we'd been assigned, working through the radio protocols with the methodical precision that had kept us alive on a dozen previous missions. But every channel returned the same thing, a 7-second pulse of static, identical in rhythm and tone regardless of frequency or encryption setting. Keller checked each team member for injuries or signs of shock, finding nothing physically wrong, except that every watch among the 6 of us had stopped at the exact same moment. 2,237 hours. And when he tried to wind his own mechanical timepiece, the movement wouldn't age the gears, somehow locked despite no visible damage. I pulled out our mission briefing documents, the few pages we'd been allowed to bring that contained the grid coordinates and the cryptic instruction to report any pre-modern architectural structures with unusual electromagnetic properties. And for the first time, I noticed a second page that I didn't remember seeing during the initial briefing, a photocopy of what appeared to be a translation from French colonial records dated 1891. The document was partially degraded but readable, a field report from the surveyor Henry de Clos, describing his team's encounter with what he called Le Temple des Murmures, the Temple of Whispers. De Clos wrote in precise technical language about magnetic anomalies that rendered their compasses useless, about temperature inversions that created pockets of cold air in violation of known meteorological principles, and about acoustic phenomena that his team's physicists described as impossible standing waves that should not exist in an open environment. But it was the final paragraph that made my blood run cold, a passage where de Clos described finding evidence of previous visitors to the temple's skeletal remains, arranged in a perfect circle around the entrance, wearing what appeared to be ancient Khmer military armor. dating back perhaps 800 years. Their bones carved with the same intricate patterns that decorated the temple walls, as if the stone's designs had somehow transferred into their very skeletons. Duclos noted that the carvings on these bones were impossible to create with any tool known to his era, requiring precision that suggested either advanced technology or something he refused to speculate about in an official report. The document ended with a handwritten note in different ink, added later stating that Duclos himself had died 3 months after filing this report, found in his quarters in Saigon, having carved similar patterns into his own arms with a piece of temple stone he'd apparently kept as a sample, bleeding out while drawing designs that matched nothing in any known language or artistic tradition. We had been stationary for perhaps 20 minutes, reviewing the documents and trying to develop some rational approach to a fundamentally irrational situation, when Briggs suddenly went rigid and whispered that he could hear something through the radio static, not words exactly, but a pattern that almost resembled human speech, played backward and slowed down to a frequency just barely within audible range. He isolated the signal and played it through the external speaker, and we all heard it then, a rhythmic vocalization that rose and fell in waves. Definitely not random noise, definitely not any language any of us recognized, but somehow familiar in a way. That made the hair on our necks stand up, because it sounded like it was trying to form words we should understand. Keller, who'd been trained in basic linguistics for interaction with local populations, pulled out his notepad and began transcribing the phonetic patterns. And after several minutes of careful listening, he looked up with an expression of complete confusion and said that the sounds matched Proto-Austroasiatic linguistic structures, a theoretical language family that linguists believed existed over 4,000 years ago as the root of multiple Southeast Asian language groups, but which had never been recorded because it predated any known writing system. The implication was impossible. We were listening to a language that shouldn't exist, being broadcast through military radio equipment from a source that had no power and shouldn't be capable of transmission. Then the jungle around us erupted with the same sound, not from our radio, but from the trees themselves, as if the forest was repeating the transmission, the leaves and branches vibrating in unison to create that ancient vocalization. And every bird and insect for kilometers around suddenly took up the pattern, creating a chorus of that pre-human language that grew louder with each repetition, until we had to cover our ears against the overwhelming volume that seemed designed to prevent any thought except the pattern itself. The sound reached a crescendo at exactly 0100 hours and then stopped, with such abrupt completeness that the silence felt like a physical blow, leaving our ears ringing and our sense of balance distorted, as if the world had tilted slightly off its axis. For perhaps 30 seconds, nothing moved, not wind, not insects, not even the leaves on the trees. And then the jungle began to change in ways that made us question whether we were experiencing shared hallucination, or whether reality itself had become negotiable in this place. The trees nearest to us started to shift their positions, not swaying in wind, but actually relocating, their root systems pulling free from the soil, with wet tearing sounds and replanting themselves in new configurations that formed a path, a corridor of vegetation, leading directly back toward the temple clearing we'd fled from. Briggs grabbed my arm and pointed at his radio, where the display screen now showed coordinates that were updating in real-time, tracking our position with precision that our equipment shouldn't have possessed. And below the coordinates, a countdown timer had appeared showing numbers, descending from 420 seconds 7 minutes, the same 7-second interval that had haunted us since entering this area now, expanded into a deadline we didn't understand but instinctively feared. The temperature began to fluctuate wildly, dropping from 70 degrees to near freezing in the span of seconds, then surging back to over 100 degrees. The rapid changes causing condensation to form and evaporate in visible waves that distorted our view of the surrounding jungle like heat shimmer on asphalt. Our tactical lights began to flicker in that same 7-second pattern, every beam pulsing in perfect synchronization, despite being powered by independent battery sources. And when I tried to switch mine off, the button wouldn't respond, as if the device had developed its own will and refused to comply with human input. Keller started hyperventilating, his medical training failing him in the face of physiological responses that shouldn't be possible. Pointing at his hands, where the skin had begun to show faint luminescence, a pale blue glow that matched the moss in the clearing. And when I looked at my own hands, I saw the same phenomenon, all 6 of us beginning to emit that ghostly light, as if we were being marked or claimed by whatever intelligence governed this place. The countdown timer on Briggs's radio reached 300 seconds, 5 minutes remaining, and that's when the first member of our team simply vanished. Private First Class Michael Torres, who'd been maintaining rear security approximately 10 meters behind our position, ceased to exist between one heartbeat and the next, not consumed or attacked, but simply absent, his equipment remaining in a perfect pile where he'd been standing as if he'd been carefully extracted from his gear and removed from reality itself. The remaining 5 of us clustered together, weapons pointed outward at threats we couldn't identify or engage, and the jungle around us began to move with purpose and intelligence that transformed our environment into something alive and hostile. The trees that had formed a path now began to close in, not slowly, but in sudden lurches that covered meters of distance in eye blinks, their bark flowing and reforming to show those same carved reliefs we'd seen in the temple. Human and inhuman figures twisted together in configurations that hurt to perceive. The ground beneath our boots started to pulse with warmth, a rhythmic heat that matched our own heartbeats, and I realized with mounting horror that the earth was somehow synchronizing with our biological rhythms, learning the patterns of our bodies in ways that suggested it was preparing to replicate or replace us. Briggs's radio began broadcasting our voices, conversations we had hours earlier, played back with perfect clarity, but edited and rearranged so that our words formed sentences we'd never spoken, confessions and pleas in our own voices saying things we'd never thought. And underlying it all was that ancient language, the Proto-Austroasiatic vocalization, as if our modern speech was being deconstructed back to its primordial roots. The countdown reached 180 seconds, 3 minutes, and another team member disappeared, Lance Corporal Jeffrey Wade, vanishing mid-step as he tried to move toward higher ground, his final footprint glowing with that same blue luminescence before fading to match the surrounding soil. The 4 of us who remained could feel something approaching, not through sound or sight, but through a pressure in the air that increased with each pulse of heat from the ground. A presence vast and ancient that was converging on our position from all directions simultaneously, above and below, and through dimensions we couldn't perceive, but could somehow sense the way you sense someone watching you in darkness. Keller started screaming that he could see it, whatever it was, pointing at nothing visible, but insisting that something enormous was moving through the trees, something that existed partially in our reality and partially in spaces that human perception couldn't process. And as the countdown reached 60 seconds, I saw it too, not with my eyes, but with some deeper sense that bypassed normal vision. It was geometry made flesh, or perhaps flesh made geometry patterns that folded in on themselves in impossible configurations. And those patterns were the same as the carvings in the temple, the same as what had appeared on the bones of the ancient Khmer soldiers, the same designs that were now beginning to manifest on our own skin as the blue luminescence spread from our hands up our arms in traceries that followed our nervous systems with anatomical precision. The radio countdown hit 30 seconds, and the temperature spiked so high that the moisture in the air turned to steam. Surrounding us in a boiling fog that carried that copper and ozone smell, intensified to the point of inducing nausea. And through the fog, we could see the temple ruins somehow, now only meters away, though we'd retreated hundreds of meters, as if distance had lost all meaning and the structure could position itself wherever it chose. At 15 seconds, Briggs dropped his radio and fell to his knees, not in pain, but in what looked like reverence or surrender. His eyes rolled back, showing only whites, as his mouth moved in patterns that formed that ancient language words that no human throat should be able to produce, emerging from him with perfect pronunciation. The entrance to the temple unsealed itself, that perfect rectangular darkness reappearing, and from within came a light that was somehow darker than the surrounding night, a luminescence that seemed to absorb photons rather than emit them. And in that light, we could see shapes moving, geometric impossibilities that suggested bodies without committing to any specific form. And every one of those shapes was reaching toward us with appendages that existed in too many dimensions to count, extending through the air in our direction as the countdown reached 0 and reality itself seemed to pause, holding us suspended in the moment before something irreversible occurred, trapped between the world we knew and whatever waited beyond the threshold of ancient stone and inhuman mathematics. The moment of suspension shattered with a sound that came from everywhere at once, a deafening roar that wasn't sound at all, but pure pressure transmitted directly into our skulls. And then the jungle erupted with artificial light, so intense it turned night into day. Massive searchlights mounted on helicopters that had appeared, without any engine noise, without any warning, simply materializing in the sky above us, as if they'd always been there waiting for this exact moment. The helicopters were unmarked flat black, with no identifying numbers or insignia, and they carried equipment I'd never seen on any military aircraft. Arrays of dishes and antennas that hummed with power and projected something invisible that hit the temple ruins like a physical force, causing the stone to vibrate so violently that chunks began to break free and fall. The geometric entities that had been reaching toward us recoiled for whatever emission the helicopters were broadcasting, pulling back into that dark light within the temple entrance. And the blue luminescence on our skin began to fade, as if the connection between us and whatever presence inhabited this place was being forcibly severed. The three of us who remained conscious, myself, Keller, and Staff Sergeant David Chun, who'd been on point security, grabbed Briggs and dragged him toward a clearing where one of the helicopters was descending. Its downdraft so powerful, it flattened the vegetation in a perfect circle that matched the clearing around the temple. Men in hazmat suits emerged before the aircraft fully touched down, moving with practiced efficiency that spoke of rehearsed protocols, and they surrounded us with handheld devices that looked like modified Geiger counters, but gave off readings in colors and patterns I didn't recognize, sweeping our bodies from head to toe while speaking into throat microphones, using codes that weren't standard military communication. One of the suited figures, distinguished by red markings on his equipment, approached me directly and spoke in a voice filtered through his suit's respirator, asking in precise technical language how long we'd been in direct contact with what he called the structure, and whether any of us had entered beyond the threshold. I told him everything: the timeline, the disappeared team members, the carvings that moved, the ancient language, all of it tumbling out in a rush, while he recorded every word on a device that definitely wasn't standard military issue. He nodded once when I finished, then turned to his team and gave an order that I caught fragments of through the radio interference. Prepare primary neutralization and biological quarantine protocols for all subjects. The other helicopters that had been circling began to descend in formation around the temple ruins, and from each emerged teams carrying equipment that I recognized from demolitions training, but modified with technology that made no sense. Devices that projected fields of energy visible as distortions in the air, bending light around the ancient stone structure in ways that made it difficult to look at directly. The red-marked figure told us to board the helicopter immediately, that we had less than 3 minutes before what he termed site sanitization would commence, and we didn't argue. Couldn't argue because the presence that had been pressing in on us from all directions was still there, held back by whatever those arrays were broadcasting. But not gone, never gone, just waiting for any gap in the coverage. Keller had to be carried aboard, his legs unable to support him, while Briggs remained catatonic, his eyes open but unseeing, his mouth still moving in those impossible phonetic patterns, though no sound emerged. As the helicopter lifted off, I looked down through the open door and saw the temple ruins beginning to glow with that dark light again. Brighter now, more intense, as if whatever dwelt within was responding to the threat with its own escalation. And the teams on the ground were retreating to their aircraft in organized haste that was almost but not quite panic. At exactly 0127 hours as we cleared the canopy and gained altitude, every helicopter simultaneously fired what I initially thought were missiles, but which moved wrong too slow and too precisely, tracking not toward the temple, but toward specific points in the air around it, forming a geometric pattern that matched the carvings we'd seen on the walls. Where these projectiles struck, reality seemed to tear, visible rifts in space that sparked with colors that don't exist in normal perception. And through those rifts, something was being pulled or pushed, the dark light from the temple being drawn into the tiers and dispersed into whatever lay beyond. The stone structure itself began to sink, not collapsing, but descending smoothly into the earth as if the ground was swallowing it whole, and as it descended, the jungle around it withered in concentric circles, vegetation aging centuries in seconds trees, becoming skeletal husks that crumbled to powder before hitting the ground. The entire clearing, everything within 200 meters of where the temple had stood, transformed into a perfectly circular area of bare earth that looked like it had been scoured clean by some force that left no trace of what had existed there moments before. The red-marked figure sat across from me in the helicopter, watching through the door as the sight disappeared beneath us. And when it was over, he turned to me with an expression I couldn't read through his face shield, and said in that filtered voice, "What you witnessed tonight has been occurring in this location for approximately 1,200 years, long before any modern military presence, long before the Khmer Empire, perhaps long before human civilization in this region. You are the 7th documented team to make contact. You are the first where anyone survived the full manifestation event." He paused, then added with what might have been regret, "The 2 who disappeared, Torres and Wade, we cannot recover them. They are no longer in any dimension we can access. For all official purposes, they died in combat during a classified operation. Their families will be told they were heroes. That is the only truth anyone outside this helicopter will ever know." The official after-action report, filed 3 days later, listed our mission as a standard reconnaissance patrol that encountered enemy contact near the Cambodian border, resulting in 2 Kia from small arms fire and 4 personnel requiring medical evacuation for combat stress reaction. Sergeant Marcus Holloway was transferred to a psychological evaluation facility at Clark Air Base in the Philippines for 6 weeks, then reassigned to a training battalion at Camp Pendleton, where his security clearance was revoked and his service records sanitized of any reference to reconnaissance operations. Corporal Vincent Briggs never spoke again after that night, spending the remainder of his enlistment in a secure medical facility that didn't appear on any official DOD installation list, diagnosed with severe catatonic schizophrenia, though the neurologists who examined him found brain activity, patterns they described as inconsistent with any known psychiatric condition. Private Raymond Keller was medically discharged 4 months later after developing a progressive neurological condition that caused the blue luminescence to return to his skin at irregular intervals, each episode requiring hospitalization and sedation until it faded, a phenomenon that military doctors attributed to psychosomatic response to combat trauma, despite having no medical explanation for bioluminescence in human tissue. Staff Sergeant David Chun died in what was officially ruled a training accident at Fort Benning in 1973, though the circumstances, found alone in a locked equipment storage room, having carved intricate geometric patterns into the concrete floor, with his bare hands until his fingers were reduced to bone, suggested something far more disturbing that no investigation ever pursued. The temple site itself was designated a permanent restricted zone under joint U.S.-Cambodian military agreement, surrounded by electronic monitoring systems that remain active. To this day, despite the end of American involvement in Southeast Asia over 50 years ago, satellite imagery of the area, when available through civilian channels, shows only dense jungle canopy with no evidence of ruins or clearings. Though military reconnaissance assets reportedly detect periodic electromagnetic anomalies emanating from the exact coordinates where the structure once stood, missions that follow a precise 7-second interval and have never varied in over 5 decades of continuous monitoring. The families of Torres and Wade received flag-draped coffins containing 150 pounds of sand from Vietnam honored in ceremonies that celebrated sacrifice for classified operations that served vital national security interests, and their names were added to memorial walls where they remain today, heroes whose true fate will never be known to those who mourn them. Multiple Freedom of Information Act requests filed over the years seeking documentation of forced recon operations in that specific area during November 1971 have been denied on grounds of national security, with agencies refusing to confirm or deny that any such operation ever occurred. I kept no written records, no photographs, no physical evidence of that night, except the memories that resurface every 7 seconds when I'm trying to sleep. The pattern burns so deeply into my consciousness that my heart rate synchronizes to it during moments of stress, my body remembering what my mind tries to forget. Research into the Khmer Empire's military history reveals scattered references to a temple complex abandoned around 1177 CE, after what surviving inscriptions describe as the place where stone learned to dream and dreams learned to consume. An entire garrison of soldiers lost when they attempted to reclaim the structure from forces the ancient texts refuse to name, describing them only through geometric symbols that match nothing in known Khmer religious or military iconography. Linguistic analysis of Proto-Austroasiatic language reconstruction, a field that didn't exist in any formal academic sense until the 1980s, has identified phonetic patterns in theoretical ancient vocalizations that precisely match the recordings Briggs managed to capture before his breakdown, though no mainstream linguist will publicly acknowledge the similarity or speculate about its implications. Whatever we encountered in that jungle had been there long before humans built temples around it, long before any empire rose or fell, waiting in patient cycles measured in centuries for moments, when the boundaries between its reality and ours grew thin enough to permit contact. The Department of Defense maintains a specialized unit officially designated as the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, but internally known by a designation that appears in no public record, dedicated to monitoring 17 sites worldwide where similar phenomena have been documented, locations where ancient structures interface with forces that predate human civilization, and where the carefully maintained illusion that we understand the universe occasionally breaks down completely. I was offered a position with that unit in 1974, a chance to understand what had happened to my team, to learn what really exists beneath the surface of classified reality. But I declined because some knowledge has a cost that exceeds any benefit understanding might provide, and I had already paid more than enough. I live quietly now in a small town in Oregon, far from jungles and classified operations, working as a hardware store manager, where the most complicated problem I face is inventory management, and the most dangerous threat is a slipped ladder. But every 7 seconds day and night for over 50 years, I feel that pulse, that rhythm that the temple broadcast into my nervous system, and that apparently cannot be erased by time, or distance, or any medical intervention I've attempted. Sometimes in the moments between those pulses, in those brief windows of silence, I wonder if Torres and Wade are still alive somewhere in whatever dimension that presence pulled them into, still experiencing that eternal moment of transition we were all trapped in before the helicopters arrived, frozen forever in the space between realities while their bodies age and die in a world they can no longer reach. And in my darkest moments, usually at 2,237 hours, when every stopped watch from that night would have frozen if they still existed, I wonder if we actually escaped at all, or if what returned in those helicopters were just sophisticated copies, geometric approximations of human beings, close enough to pass every test except the one that measures whether something possesses a soul or merely simulates, having one with sufficient precision to fool even itself. Don't forget to follow our channel for more military encounters. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our investigations into phenomena that defy everything we've been taught about reality. And subscribe to join our community of truth seekers who refuse to accept official explanations that ignore overwhelming evidence.